Hi everyone, welcome. What you see here is my VermiBag Mini. It's a 36-day-old system, fairly young system, with red wigglers in it. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but we've estimated this population to have in excess of 3,000 worms living in it. The last time we checked in here, which was only 10 days ago, we had removed what was a paper, cardboard covering, which didn't seem to be doing a very good job keeping things damp down here. So the top surface was relatively dry and devoid of any worm activity. So I thought that if we were to replace it with this piece of plastic right here, that we would sort of cause the recirculation of moisture down within the system and enable worms to even roam the very top surface of the material. And it seems to have been working, because I've even got worms that are just attached to the plastic cover here. Little tiny ones. Itsy bitsy baby worms. Kind of hard to see. So I'm sort of taking my time to make sure we didn't miss any. Even a couple more right over here. Very, very small worms. So I will take one more look at this in a moment, just to make sure we haven't left any poor worms stranded on this plastic, because the plastic will not be coming back on when we're done right now. And that might seem kind of weird, and for that matter, we're not even feeding on camera today. What we're actually going to be doing is launching a new time-lapse today here in this container. You can even see I've been busy setting things up. You can see the camera that's going to be doing the work. That's the camera that I usually film with when we're doing our everyday feedings over here. The camera that we're filming with right now is one that I borrowed from my brother-in-law, so thank you to my brother-in-law for his generous loan. And we just took the top covering cardboard that had been doing the job previously, and we rested it over here on the top surface, and then we placed their last feeding right into this this piece of cardboard here. It still seems to be holding up as leftovers, as do some of the foods that we applied recently. I don't think that this corn was part of the last feeding. I think the last feeding was stuff that was going to go pretty quick, stuff like cucumber peels maybe. I believe that the corn cobs might actually date back to a previous feeding. I could be wrong. These could have actually been part of the last feeding. And I guess we'll have to just submerge them right below where the main subject of the time-lapse is going to be. It's going to be a little tiny pumpkin. It's not a very big pumpkin. It's a pumpkin that's perhaps the size of both of my hands cupped together like this. I mean, to get the shot framed, I even sort of created a little understudy. I took this plastic container, I even wrapped it in orange plastic bag to give me a sense of what the pumpkin would look like in frame over here. It's not quite as large as this here, so it'll certainly fit into the frame no problem. The only thing I really wanted to do, and I figured I'd bring you along for the ride, was to submerge anything light colored. I didn't want to have any of this light color stuff out on the surface. I thought that if the worms were to come up to the surface in pursuit of that little pumpkin, then maybe we get to see them, but if they're mixed in with all kinds of scraps of shredded paper and cardboard, it might be hard to see them. So I thought that if we can place the pumpkin onto almost all castings surface, then that would give us a much better chance of seeing some worms hanging out. So I thought that we would remove anything that's in here, including any large piles of shredded paper cardboard, and try to get that stuff for the most part submerged and out of view of the camera, so that the surface onto which we end up placing the little mini pumpkin would be mainly a dark colored substance, castings ideally. So we are going to place all these old pumpkin stems down beneath where the pumpkin's going to go, though, because I don't really want to remove these things. There are worms hanging out in and on this material and in the corn cobs too, so I figured the best bet for all these large objects, which I don't really want to have in the frame or in the picture, was to sort of have them submerged below the spot where the pumpkin's going to go in. And then that's going to be the same for this large piece of cardboard too. That's also just going to get sunken down under the surface. So I need to collect all those things up that I want to obscure from view of the camera for when the time lapse begins. So we'll remove them all temporarily, create ourselves a nice large hole, and sink them all down into that hole. And then off camera, I'll put the finishing touches on getting this time lapse initiated. I've got the little mini pumpkin up in my freezer all set to go, and that thing's been in my freezer for many, many months. Poor thing, you know, I mean, refrigerator does have a tendency to sort of absorb moisture out of materials. So it has sort of dried a little bit just from being in the freezer for many, many, many months on end now. And I think the reason I had cut into it in the first place was because it had already actually started to show signs of degradation. Believe it or not, I still actually do have one remaining white colored pumpkin underneath my bench over here in my wormery that still goes back to last Halloween. It's now August, end of August. So this pumpkin has amazingly held up. And I do keep checking it every week or so. I check to see if there's like any soft spots or any signs of it starting to break down. And if I were to observe anything like that, then I would certainly cut that thing up into worm food as well and do away with it. But until that happens, I think we'll just kind of keep it around. Maybe even until next Halloween. So this little stem of the pumpkin has a couple worms on it. Just figured I'd hold it here in front of the camera for a moment or two to give us a little view of these guys. See what kind of activity they show once they realize that these bright lights are all over them. Alright, we're going to put this stem in with the rest of the collection, and I think that's the last of the big chunks of material that was going to need to get sunken out of view for the time lapse. I found a feature in my video editing software that permitted me to do some interesting clips. This looks like some corn cob. It looks so interesting when you can see some of its structure. So I've been doing this weird kind of holding something in front of the camera and then stabilizing my hand. And by stabilizing my hand, which is really what's moving, the background ends up jittering, which is kind of like this weird effect that I've been sort of getting a kick out of lately. So nowadays in each video I've been tending to grab a handful of something and try to hold it in front of the camera for a minute or two to see if I can get a similar clip to what I've had in a couple of my previous videos. So I think we've managed to locate most of the things that I think need to get submerged. Last time too, I think we had just sort of stumbled on a fairly large pile of this shredded paper and cardboard that I use as my prepared bedding. But it does seem like by being down in the system, the worms are gradually working the stuff down, because I don't feel like we're bumping into large piles of this stuff like we had in the past. So that's a good thing. The worms always appreciate a little bit of bedding. Well, actually probably appreciate a whole bunch of bedding. So I'm surprised at how deep I need to go to get at the section of the system where the worms are really all hanging out. They're actually pretty down low, surprisingly enough. Alright, let's let these little guys all settle in a little bit, and then we could pile in all this stuff and then level things off, and that'll really be the end of the video. From there I'll take it off camera to get the time lapse initiated, and that'll be our check-in. Okay, here we go. I spent a moment or two there just to make sure that no worms were being left behind on that plastic covering that's not coming back into the system. And I didn't find any, but maybe I'll take one more look after we're done here. I'll usually let the material on a piece of plastic like that dry a little bit, and then I'll shake off the castings and put them back into the worm bin rather than trashing this stuff. All the worms I'm finding adhering to this plastic container are all very, very tiny little baby worms. To me, it's always a good sign to see baby worms. So now this biggest of the stems, just want to make sure it's down deep enough so it's not going to protrude through the surface. Although I guess it doesn't matter so much because the pumpkin's going to sit a little bit off center to make sure there's an adequate distance away from the camera. I think the camera, these GoPro action cameras, require a minimum of 10 inches for stuff to be in focus. Kind of making me wonder if that little sequence of me holding the material in front of the camera is going to be too close and blurry. We'll see. I'm still sort of just trying to learn that method and perfect it, but I do like the effect it causes. It's kind of neat. And I guess my aim here is to try to come up with a surface here that's got a minimum amount of this shredded paper and cardboard out on the top surface, but I suppose it's not the end of the world if there's a little bit of it remaining. If any worms do come out to the surface while they're eating that little frozen pumpkin, then we should be able to distinguish them from little scraps of shredded paper and cardboard. So after this, I've got a few more things to do, getting this whole system over into my little dark filming area, getting the camera, getting the light source, getting the little pumpkin itself all set up, and then cutting these little guys loose on this next feeding. Little pumpkin that size, especially since it's frozen, I can't imagine it taking too long for it to break down. Not like some of my other time lapses where I use pumpkins that have not been frozen. Those took a little while to break down in the past, but I got a feeling that this time lapse is not going to take too long. Partially because of the size of the pumpkin, and partially because of the fact that it's frozen. Alright everyone, that's it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.